Again, this is Jerry Goodrow with Contex. Everyone, welcome. This is our webinar for questions and answers for large format context scanners. And we have in our audience Dan Bennett, our technical expert from Contex. Dan, are you out there?
Hey, Jerry.
Hey. And we also have, I believe, Peter Boudreau from the Drafting Clinic Canada, our distributor up north. Peter, are you there?
Yeah,
hey, how you doing?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. And then I think we also have Rich Geigel from National Azon Equipment. They're our U.S. Context distributor. Rich, are you out there? Well, I think he's in the audience, but a question that was sent in was saying that when making an adjustment to a scanned image and sending it to print, it's crashing the HP print software. And why is this happening? Dan, is this something you can answer?
As far as print issues coming out of next image, typically it's going to be a handful of different things, different possibilities. So I'll kind of give you just a quick hit list of things to check because it could be one or multiples, but typically it's going to be one of these few things. So number one, when you're outputting to an HP printer specifically, you want to make sure that you have the printer set up as a local printer driver on your Windows PC. You don't want it running through a print server necessarily. The reason that is there's a service called SNMP that we need to utilize that service to output to those particular printers. And often when you set up under a print server, that service doesn't get started, which would be the next thing that you definitely want to verify. And that's that SNMP is running as a service in Windows. And you can check that through your system settings in Windows to make sure that service is running. Basically, especially with the HP printers, we rely on bi-directional communication. And what that gives you is a much more intelligent application as far as what the printer is doing. So if there's any error messages being generated on a printer, it tells us things like roll information. If you have a multi-roll printer with multiple different media styles or types installed, all that information gets fed back to next image. So you want to really make sure that that's running. Another thing is within next image, if you go up to the settings tab, go to printer setup and click change, there is something, two settings in that dialog. One is, are you running a Windows printer or an application printer? And you want to use the application printer driver because that gives us full control of the printer. It works much more efficiently than the Windows driver. Along with that is a template, and it should default to the printers that you have installed in Windows. But you want to verify, just in case somebody's made a change someplace, that the template is set to the printer that you are attempting to output to. So you want to make sure you're using application driver and you have the correct template set. Usually it's going to be one of those items right there that cause the most amount of problems. But so that's going to be the best place to start. After that, it starts to get a little more complex, and we have some nice tools that if you're continuing to have a problem, we would ask you to send what we call a service package, and that can be generated from wide system. You just go up to wide system, you right click on or open the application, right click on the icon in the upper left hand corner and ask for a service package. It will generate a file that then you can send to your support rep, and they'll be able to hopefully identify where the real problem is within that service package. And if not, then it can be sent to us and we can analyze it as well. So hopefully, that was a lot of different detailed items, but hopefully it's going to be one of those options there. We also have an FAQ on our website. So if you just go to context.com, click on frequently asked questions, and there is a list of things that are normal to check if you're having any type of a printer problem. And so hopefully one of those things is going to solve that problem.
And like you said, sending that packet could, in a pinch, that could really help.
Yeah, when all else fails and you still are struggling, then the service package will capture a considerable amount of data for us to analyze.
And then, so we have a question from Manuel, or a couple actually. So he's saying if the glass or the wire rollers have a speck, sometimes an extra gray band shows on one of the edges. And if we set the full length auto size check mark, then it does not happen, but it introduces a delay, recropping and displaying.
Okay, so if I understand the question properly, then when you're set for auto size, you may end up getting a full width scan instead of maybe a smaller, say C size. You're scanning a C size original, but you set it for auto size and it gives you a full width. So depending on the scanner, and this is dependent on each individual scanner, some scanners such as the HD Ultra X uses a series of paper sensors along with different algorithms that we use in the software to figure out sizing. And but for example, if it's a different scanner model, it may only utilize the algorithms because we didn't include an extra set of sensors. So I'm going to assume that this is just a one without paper sensors that are running across the width of the scanner, because that'll probably explain it better than anything. If you have something either on the white background plate or on the glass plate, and it's out further, and it doesn't have to be all the way full width, but it often is. If something is captured there in the scan line, the way we determine where the paper edges are is by doing a gray tone comparison analysis. And if we see something, some noise or artifact or whatnot way out on the outer reaches, then it's going to grab that and consider that being the paper edge. And then you'll get these larger than desired images. And so the only real solution for that is to go determine what exactly it is that it's seeing. Often, like I said, it's either dirt or glue or something that's dark, and it's either on the white background or the glass plate. And when looking for these things, you got to remember the scanner, if it's a 1200 optical resolution scanner, that noise can literally be a 1200th of an inch in diameter, but if it falls right where the scan line is across through the glass plate, then it's going to see it, and it's going to see it very dark, and it could make a mistake and use it instead of the actual paper edge
as that auto size,
as the sheet size. So often, if you're doing a large amount of scanning, often you'll end up saving time by determining the actual sheet size. So for example, if you have 1,000 D-size images to scan, you might be better suited just to set a fixed sheet size of D, portrait or landscape, and just scan them all that way. You're not relying on things like dirt to influence your auto sizing. Plus, you'll get an absolute perfect D-size sheet size instead of maybe a 24 by 36.2 inches or something.
Right.
If
and so
bigger.
in our tools settings, we have an ability to turn on a variety of different paper sizes, right? Like ISO and architectural sizes and things like that. If you're only dealing with American architectural sizes, it's probably best that you only have that paper selection checked, right?
Right, and there's also another feature. There's quite a few auto sizing options within Next Image. There's another feature called Auto Size To, and Auto Size To can actually auto size to a fixed ISO or architectural or ANSI sheet size if you desire that. So what it will do is if it's close to, for example, a D size, then it will snap to a full D size sheet no matter what. That way, like if you're archiving a bunch of documents, it's really appealing to have every sheet be a perfect 24 by 36 D instead of slight variations,
Right.
because
Little
the paper
points of
has
inches here and
expanded
there.
or contracted, right? And I see Manuel mentioned it was white rollers that he was concerned about, and so again, things like scratch on a white rollers, because they are turning, specks of dirt on a white roller is less visible because the roller is turning and it doesn't see it in every pass when it tries to size. But things like a scratch on a white roller will certainly cause it to
look like a line, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
and he was also asking about the best way to clean those white rollers.
Probably, I would say on white rollers, Windex is probably your best solution, just a glass cleaner. It typically removes inks very well. Isopropyl alcohol, things like that will work well on those rollers because they're just a metal-based roller. Usually, you don't want to use like isopropyl on rubber.
Like the rubber, right? So it'll dry
Exactly.
it out.
Yeah. So those rollers, and the easiest way to clean them is usually just hold them in position with one hand and wipe them off with the other, with a saturated, cloth of whatever cleaner that you're using, and then you can, move the roller as you get things cleaned off.
And so he was also saying for drawings that have a very rough edge, we try to use transparent material to feed, but they leave a slight mark. Any advice? And I'm guessing what he means by a slight mark, maybe the opaqueness of like something clear, something like that, maybe?
Or are you using a carrier sheet?
Or yeah, well, I mean that definitely leaves kind of or it gives you that a little bit of look, especially in color scanning.
Yeah, like with carrier sheets, typically you want to use a fixed sheet size for sure, because when you auto size those, the translucency of the film shows up darker against the white rollers, and it will typically want to size to the overall carrier sheet size instead of just the
Gotcha. So it sounds like actually kind of two issues. If he's using things to straighten out a rough edge, then that's going to change the size right there for the auto sizing.
Right. See, in that situation, I think you would be better served just to either pick a fixed sheet size or create a manual sheet size, which you can do very easily as well. So if the normal, say, architectural sheet sizes aren't going to work in your particular case, then you can set your own just by typing in the dimensions of the sheet, and then you can
Gotcha.
actually save that as a future sheet size.
And then you've got that set size, you know it's right, and then you have this rough edge with a little bit of transparency. But then you can move, once that's all scanned in, you can move that entire 24 by 36-inch frame to its perfect right around the drawing, right?
Yeah, that's another option to crop. And yep, yeah, I would say that would be the.
I think that would probably go the smoothest for somebody that's, if you're doing that on a lot of drawings and needing to move through the most possible and get the right sizes, I think that's probably going to be the fastest way. But
Yeah.
Let's see. And then sometimes the scanner backs up and the feed sheet backs up the feed sheet without a known reason. Any reason for concern? Is that a memory buffering thing? Is that almost like I wonder which model scanner he has, because a lot of this has been taken care of with some of the newer. That shoe shining effect.
So repeat that, because sometimes it's.
Sure. So sometimes the scanner backs up the feed sheet without a known reason. Any reason for concern?
Yeah, no, that's just, again, it depends on the scanner model, because we do it differently depending on the model. But in most cases, anytime you see you're in the middle of a scan and it stops, often it will stop and then back up a little bit. What it's doing is the scanner has overrun the buffers in the PC, and we need to stop the scan, wait for the PC to catch up. And then if you see it back up, the reason it backed up is we want to be up to speed when we get to that last scanned line.
Gotcha.
And so you don't get any start-stop jitter.
And this is on a Quattro X.
So on a Quattro X, typically, unless you're scanning really high resolutions, you shouldn't be overrunning. Those have a very large buffer in them. And but again, if you're scanning, say, color documents and you're scanning at a fairly high resolution, you may get ahead of it. Another important thing with any of the X scanners, the Quattro X, the HD Ultra X, the best throughput you will get on that particular scanner is USB 3. So you want to make sure that you haven't accidentally plugged into a USB 2 port.
On the PC, you mean?
Yeah, or running it Ethernet. Ethernet is a fast interface, and it's always been traditionally the fastest in the latter days. But with the new Ultra X's, it really has been optimized to be running on USB 3.
And he's saying that they're using the USB 3.
Yeah, re-verify it, because it's real critical that is the case. Other things that will will slow the scanner down are certain filter settings with the next image. So, for example, if you're using a smoothing filter, a despeckling filter, any of those types of filters, we have to manage that from the PC side, and that will slow down the scan rates as well. So a quick test that you can run is scan, say, 200 DPI, TIFF uncompressed. Even the scanners have gotten so fast now, this interface, that even compressing the file from, say, TIFF to LZW, for example, will slow the scan speeds down, and that could potentially cause a stop. So you want to make sure that any of those types of filters, just as a quick test, go TIFF uncompressed and 200 DPI color. You should see the scanner run without stopping.
Gotcha. And if it does, then this might be another issue.
Yeah, it's something else to look at, whether, maybe a buffering issue once it's trying to write the files to, say, the hard drive in the computer, that type of thing. But
So that's a good troubleshooting test, is to do that scan 200 DPI, TIFF uncompressed, and see if you get.
Yeah, it takes all the algorithms out of the mix, and just is basically dumping raw data from the scanner to the PC. So it's a great test to confirm that things are running at the right
Gotcha.
speeds.
And Kevin is asking, saying, for scanning blueprints, are we aware of a software that can compare two blueprints and detect changes between the two images?
Well, there are a lot of comparative applications out there. They haven't really, most of them aren't written specifically around that particular application. We're checking one blueprint against another, but they all work very, very similar. For example, I'll just throw one out there, Global Vision. Their application is designed around proofing, and proofing in the printing business. So they'll take the original file that they sent to the press, and then maybe every whatever the specification is for verifying the plates are good on the printing press, they'll pull sheets right off the press, they'll scan those, and they'll use this comparative software to verify against the original versus the what's coming off the press runs. And that's a standard application for those particular runs, but I would imagine it could be used similarly to this application. I would almost defer that. The drafting clinic in Canada works really, really closely with, for example, Global, and they could probably help you out.
And then, so Joe is asking, our scanner always skews the drawing slightly, like 2 degrees. Is it the roller speed?
Normally, skewing is going to be caused by one of two things. One is as paper dust, and it's going to sound funny, but this is probably the biggest number one culprit. Typically, documents are fairly dusty and dirty themselves, whether you can see it or not. And as you scan, the rubber lower feed rollers, these are the ones that we're concerned about more than anything, the lower feed rollers, they will build up a bit of dust, and that will typically cause 90% of the skewing. And if you're seeing that. So the best thing to do is, especially with newer scanners, just use a lint-free cloth with water, and wet the cloth, and then just open the lid, use the paper advance button to turn the rollers, and just take your thumb or a finger and clean each roller very quickly, and you'd be amazed at how much of a difference that makes alone. And so cleaning the lower feed rollers is your number one thing to check.
And that's where you were saying you can kind of open it and have the motor advance and just kind of hold it on the roller to.
Right. It's the fastest, simplest way to clean a feed roller.
And it gets the whole roller, and you're not sitting there pushing the roller trying to get one little.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And it will take probably.
It's almost like lathing the dirt down off of that one roller.
Yeah, and it's so much faster. you can clean all the rollers in a matter of a minute.
Well, I think you see, especially if you come back with a clean cloth, you can see right away if you've got everything.
Another possibility would be, like, for example, if the white background was not positioned perfectly, sometimes one side of the white background will be raised or whatnot, and that can cause some skewing. Again, depending on the model of the scanner, we have the feather mode on the Ultra X, for example. If that was enabled or disabled, that can cause no pressure, too much pressure on the paper, and cause some skewing. And but normally go to the basics first, clean the rollers, and you'll probably find that that's gonna solve most of your problems.
And I think this would cause a greater skewing than just a couple of degrees. But if the lid was not seated properly on both sides, where you had that
Yep.
click in on both
Absolutely.
sides,
Yeah,
I think that would cause a much bigger skew than just a little bit, but still, just make sure that lid is clicked in.
right. And not, for the scanners with either an ATAC system or an OTAC, you want to make sure that the guide plate's lowered. You could have it. Someone could have come in and scanned a piece of gator board, and it's raised. He didn't get it lowered all the way, and same basic principle there. The newer scanners, we actually have lid sensors now on both ends that will detect if it is raised, but often you miss that. It's on the operator's panel. You'll get a little, excuse me, you'll get a little yellow paper indicator that tells you that the lid is in a raised position or not. But
gotcha. Oh, right. And then Sarah has an issue with their HD Ultra scanner, and they're saying, regarding to the HD Ultra scanner, my team has been encountering a lot of issues with lines through our scans. I believe this is due to the high sensitivity of the scanner and camera. This is in color and black and white, and at 300 dpi. Is there a way to reduce the sensitivity to the lines without losing the scan data on the paper?
So you're correct. The sensitivity of the cameras is what's detecting these lines, and we actually talk about this in almost every single one of these webinars that we've done. The the bit depth and the high resolution of the scanners allow them to be able to see absolutely everything. And so as new dirt or grit particles get introduced into the scanner, typically by the document itself, it'll show up as a streak or a line running the paper path direction through the image. And this is basically caused by these small artifacts that stop, excuse me, I'm losing my voice here, stop on the glass plate during the scan process. And some of these lines you'll see actually appear in the middle of a scan, and then they may disappear as well. And then they may move someplace else. And it's just a little different artifacts that are getting introduced. So how do you get rid of them? That's the biggest challenge. So there's several
things. At least if they move, you can get rid of them, right?
Exactly. The fact that they're moving, number one, is the number one symptom that it is grit particles that are temporarily showing up on the glass and then they disappear again. If they never move, then it could be something, physically on the glass, could be a scratch on the glass, that type of thing. But the fact that they move around is a real telltale symptom that you're dealing with, like small temporarily pieces of artifacts that get introduced onto the glass. So there's a couple of quick things that you can do. Number one, when you clean the scanner, you want to wipe the entire bed of the scanner off, the table that you're inserting the documents on. And when you clean the glass, often you don't need to even use a cleaner. These glass plates are pretty slick and lint-free cloth. But the key with it is, as you wipe the glass off, you want to wipe from full right to full left, or full left to full right. The idea is you want to drag all the artifacts off of the glass, because if you don't, they're just going to keep moving around. And so, like, if you use a swirling motion to clean, that's not the best thing in the world, because you're just moving things around. The idea is you want to get it away from the scanner. You want to drag it off the glass plate. The document is another really huge source, especially with like old archives. These things have been exposed and the paper's deteriorating and all kinds of things are happening. And a lot of these little silica artifacts will cling to the glass because of static electricity. And then as they rub across the glass, they stop temporarily. And glass is very, very porous under a microscope. It's porous. So there's another trick. And I noticed when Jerry brought up some of the questions, it was asked in the question list. And they asked about Rain-X. So Rain-X, again, is something that is sold in like auto parts stores to clean your windshield. And it was first discovered in the airline business to try to keep water sheeting off of the glass instead of sticking. It works excellent for that same thing in a scanner, where you wipe on, you put a little on a cloth, you kind of buff it onto the glass, let it dry to a sheen, and then buff it off. And then again, one big swipe to ensure everything's gone. The advantage of this is it's kind of a waxy surface that fills in all of the pores. And the idea is, if a grit particle, which is almost certainly going to be in existence, it keeps it traveling through the scanner so it doesn't show up as a streak. The idea is to keep the grit particles moving through and across the glass and not sticking to the glass. And that will go a long, long ways. And people often ask, well, how often should I do it? It really depends on how much you're scanning. The higher volumes, you'd want to do this more often, maybe even once a morning or something like that. But typically, a couple times a week is going to be plenty at the most, even in a high production environment. But the idea is, again, we don't want these things stopping, because if they stop, and they stop right where the scan line, it's going to show up as a line. Now, with that being said, there's one other type of line, and that's kind of a permanent line without any other color in it, and that's critical. If the line is kind of a light line through a dark area, then probably what that is the scanner was dirty during the last color calibration. And the calibration's intelligent enough to see that and then compensate for it. But now, later, after the calibration, you discover it, you clean it, because it was introduced into the calibration, it's going to show up as a colorless streak, a line with no color in it. And the way to resolve that, again, re-clean the glass, calibrate on a clean glass, and then those light lines without any color will get.
Because that speck is probably gone by this point, and then so the scanner's compensating for it, right?
Yeah, it's really important when you do color calibrate that you always clean the glass first. That's a super critical piece of it, because you don't want to introduce more artifacts to the calibration. So,
gotcha.
And you do not need to calibrate every single time you clean the scanner. That's not necessary. You basically just need to
make sure it's clean when you calibrate it.
Exactly. Yep.
And then we've got a question from Alicia. Let's see. The IP address for Wi-Fi scanning often resets on its own, and the IP address we are trying to use has to be added manually again and again. And they're using a Canon Image Prograph TM300.
Yeah. So normally, especially with Wi-Fi routers, they run on what they call a DHCP server. And what that does is it assigns IP addresses randomly, and it renews those IP addresses as well. So typically, for things like scanners, things like printers, you would be better served to set a static IP address for those devices. That way they can never change. And if you're running on a wireless router, you can have your IT person set a range of IP addresses on the router that are reserved, and then assign one of those IPs to, say, for example, the scanner, and then it will never shift again. It'll never change. And but normally, if the scanner's set up for DHCP, even on a wireless router, it should redetect that. But it's tricky because, excuse me, often the PCs, they assign an IP to the as a recognized IP address on the particular scanner. Then the wireless router changes it, and all of a sudden now wide system can't find the scanner any longer. You have to do a refresh, and then it should detect it again. But all of those headaches will go away if you just set a static IP for the scanner, which you can easily set. But you want to make sure on a wireless device that you are doing it in a reserved area of IP addresses. And you'd probably be better served actually to just run an Ethernet cable to the scanner. We're passing a lot of data across a wireless LAN connection, and on a wireless connection. That's a lot of data to be going across, and it'll be a lot more efficient if you actually used
Go hardwired
an Ethernet cable. Yeah,
gotcha.
hardwired.
Well, at the very least, it'll be a lot less headaches, right?
Yeah, it'll be a lot more stable and a lot faster, honestly. So,
and then let's see, just to back up real quick on the Robert was saying additionally that they do clean the glass and the rollers daily and using Rain-X once a week, and so that was on the other one, I think, or actually that was okay. So that was follow up to this. This is his question. We use an IQ Quattro 4490 in a production environment, 100 to 400 scans per day of old maps. We usually get 6,000 scans before the glass needs to be rotated / changed due to scratches. Our production timelines don't allow for the time to clean the maps before scanning. You may talk to the customer about that. Is it possible to get harder glass or bulk pricing on the glass? And that's where he's saying, additionally, we clean the glass and the rollers daily and use Rain-X once a week.
So the glass, as far as a harder glass, the issue that we have with that is, as a general rule, the harder the glass gets, the less optically.
That's what I was going to say. The optical purity, right?
Yeah, and so that's where you run into issues with running some of the really hard glasses. So the second is bulk pricing, and certainly I'm pretty certain that with the IQ 44, we had a discount on 5 glass plates as a single part number. And okay. I would have to verify that again.
Sure. But that's a part number we can probably dig up that's different from just the glass plate part number.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
so then we can
go look at the price list, but I'm pretty certain that there's a discount available when you are buying 5 plates.
Okay.
At a set.
And then, not to skip Manuel's last couple of questions here. Sometimes the scanner issues an overwrite file prompt without a known reason. It forces us to edit manually the file name. Please advise.
So anytime the scanner sees in the same folder the same file.
Same file, right?
Yeah, it will ask for it. Now you can disable that, but buyer beware.
Just keep overwriting
because it can get you in trouble. But that is an option that you can disable or enable with the next.
I would think just adding a little auto name, maybe a timestamp or something into that.
Yeah, sometimes what happens, what I've seen with it is, for example, let's say you are using an auto file name by incremental counter. So in other words, I want to call my documents image, and I want to add a 3-digit counter to it. So it's going to be image 001, and then in bat scanning mode, it's just going to keep naming them
up to 999, right?
Right. So on a 3-digit counter. And what happens sometimes is if you stopped the scan or something like that, something occurred where you stop the scan process and then you go to scan again, again, if it's set to overwrite the last known file, say image 497, if it sees that 497, it's gonna ask, are you sure you want to do that? And that's usually where it goes,
where
the message pops. So somewhere along the line, either the scan process is stopped, started again, and instead of it going straight to 498, all the parameters are still set for the last 497. Things like another thing that'll happen is, you're scanning an image, you look at it and you make a slight change to it. Maybe you increase the threshold value a little bit, and then you hit go again. It's going to say, hey, wait, you made a change. It's a little different message, but it's basically the same. You made a change. You sure you wish to override your savings? But
and then he's also saying some projects involve dusty drawings with sticky chemical residuals, such as molten rubber bands. We brush them during the prepping, but perhaps we have an alternate suggestion.
So those things are really tough, especially in a production and high productivity environment. Document prep is so important. And
it's usually the longest. It's the part that takes the longest these days.
It really does. And there isn't any real great tips and tricks for dealing with some of those things.
I think a lot of it comes down to what you're able to do with it after the scan. If it's scan and then get rid of it, then there's a number of things you can do. If it's scan and then save it the way that it was, that's a different story, right?
Right. And depending on the application, like in the archival world, everything, they want to leave it perfect, just like it was, with all the noise.
Right. With the rubber bands.
Right. But the bottom line is you got to get it to run through the scanner, and you got to get it to go through without causing a new. I would say the number one scanning enemy of the world is Scotch tape. You have Scotch tape on it, and then they peel the tape off, and it leaves that gum, and that stuff just it wants to stick to glass.
Right.
And it's not hard to clean it, but it shows up as lines in the document. And
so I think it depends on the fragility, but I've had some good luck with painters masking tape, to cover up things and then still be able to get that tape off. But it really comes down to, like you said, if we're dealing with an archiving project that you have to have pristine original afterwards, that's just helping things get through the scanner isn't always the only option.
Yeah, so I wished I had a great tip for you. It's those are the difficulties that you run into, and those are also the things that as experience comes, those things need to be considered when quoting big archival jobs like that.
Or like dusty maps. I mean, a lot of times I think the customer needs to understand that when they get the first few back and they say, oh, well, there's these lines and this stuff, I need a little change of the quality, that change in the quality is going to mean extra prep steps for somebody having to wipe down every map every time they're going into the scanner. That can add hours and hours to the project, And I think things like sticky edges, those are great things for document carriers, because at the very least, you're not going to introduce any of that sticky stuff into the scanner that way.
Right. Peter had a good point as well of using Swiffer dusters because of the
static, right?
Yeah. cling within the duster itself. It really attracts stuff off the document. So
I think typically what they use in a lot of service bureaus is those big bags, like the cotton almost batting, where you get them off, they have kind of set them in sheets and they're super clean, and you can kind of get them through and not have to, spend a fortune to get something clean that you can really get the dust off with. But I think the Swiffer sounds like a much better idea. That's static.
Yeah, that's a great tip, Peter. Thanks.
So Joe had a follow-up question saying, we clean the glass on our IQ Quattro 4490, I'm assuming is what he means here. There's an LED color light. There's an LED color light show. Is it possible just to make it white so we can see this? Oh, when he opens the Quattro, that it's
so use the LEDs cycling for light source. Yep. Yeah. So that's a funny comment.
It's distracting from the cleaning.
From years of doing trade shows, that scanner is it's kind of like a light in the middle of the night that attracts the moth
attention.
You can open the lid on an IQ, and from halfway across the show floor, people will start working their way towards those flashing LEDs.
Right.
Because
they come over and say, "Wow, what's that printer doing?
What's it doing?" So there is a certain combination. The firmware guys, when we first did that, the idea of having the red, the green, and the blue flashing was a quick, easy way to be able to see that all the LEDs were working.
Right. You got no problem with your sensor.
Yeah. And on a sys scanner, we have to flash the different primary colors out during the scan process. So that's why they started doing that. What you may not have known is as you cover some of the different paper sensors, they will glow different colors. So you can get solid yellow and a kind of a white color, and depending on which one of those paper sensors you close, or in combinations thereof. So I think when you close all three of them, the leading, trailing, and the lid sensor all at the same time, I think you get a white color. So the trick to that may be taking a small piece of paper and covering up the paper sensors,
or a couple of Post-its.
Looking for kind of a totally undoctrinated view of how we use the lights, but that's actually an interesting thing, because it would give you a nice light to work off of.
Right, to at least see some extra stuff that needs to be cleaned.
Yeah, because some of these things are really hard to see. You kind of have to almost get down at an angle to really capture the stuff that's on the glass when you're trying to clean it. So the tip, maybe we need to put that in a technical manual. When cleaning the glass, cover these paper sensors, and you'll get a different
one of those little, a little light bulb and a tip, down by it. Let's see. And then I think, and then, so just in follow-up, Manuel had mentioned when we were talking about the file naming error, coming around, he said it is on auto name and it works 99% of the time using the incremental counter. So I think,
when it does that, it, like I said, there's always a reason for it. Sometimes catching the reason is the tricky part, because you have to really pay attention, and when you're doing bigger volumes of documents, you don't really notice what happened, but it's always because that file got created for some reason, and usually it's because something was started and stopped and then started again, or a modification.
And sorry, I missed it when we were talking before about the other question, but our friend Frank Blundell weighed in, saying that he has had a customer scanning 40-year-old engineering drawings, and they had to clean the drawings before each scan, as well as clean the scanner and the scanner glass periodically during that scanning process. So I think, like where they were talking about the map scanning and the bulk glass and things like that, I think it comes down to, a lot of the times, the customer needs to understand the additional processes to get the quality that they're looking for in their their delivered scan.
Right. I had years ago visited a color shop that did high-end artwork, and and it was really struggling with lines in their scans because of the nature of the media that he was scanning. And once I showed him how to get good results, the very next comment was, "Well, do you really expect me to have to do this between each and every scan?"
Right.
And so we went down this little procedure of like, okay, let's number one, let's time how long it would take to do this. Scanning your specific type of original that you're scanning, meaning a piece of fine art. And so we scanned an original, and then I stopped and I cleaned it, and we set up a stopwatch and timed it. And the total process took like 20 seconds, I think. From the time I had to flip the lid open, wipe the glass off down, close it, wipe the bed, wipe the original off, and then scanned it. And he's like, "Man, that's just crazy to have to do that." And I went, "All right, let's look at what you're doing. If you're getting the results that you wanted off of the first scan, there's a time savings associated
Right.
with
Of
that, actually.
not having to rescan, not having to double check it. There's a lot of things there, right?
Yeah, and with fine art, remove the need to potentially add more risk by having to scan the original twice.
Right. Because you want to shoot it right the first time.
And I told them, absolutely, your time is valuable, and you should be billing your customer for whatever extra time it took to produce the results that you required. So I would just, add a small amount for this extra step that you took, and you're going to be able to provide results that maybe the next guy down the street isn't willing to do.
Right.
And that will put you at another, favor in the market. And again, this was a very critical customer with a very critical application, and he's one of the few people that I've ever, like 6 months later, received a letter from, thanking me for the time that we spent out there to show them this, and the results that he was getting after doing this made all the difference in his business. And I really appreciated it because the time we spent was valuable, and he got a benefit out of it. And it was all about hygiene and really nothing else. And so often the most difficult to deal with things are actually the easiest to deal with, but you have to understand what it is that you're dealing with in the beginning. And so lines and documents is something that we've been dealing with for many, many years because of the nature of the technology and a glass. And the answer to it is always fairly simple, and it just comes down to understanding
Right.
why you need to clean the way you clean and the best way to do it, and to do it quick.
Our partner Peter is adding in saying everyone charges for indexing, naming the scans. Preparation should be billable as well.
Good point, Peter.
Yep. But it looks like we're kind of wrapping things up. So what I'll do is we will kind of conclude for today, and we will offer another session like this, I'm sure, very soon. And if there are no other questions, let's see. We'll thank everyone for coming, and we'll look forward to seeing you here next time. And Dan, thank you very much for your time and expertise. And Rich and Peter, thank you guys very much for coming. And Frank, also, thanks for weighing in the background. And everyone have a great day.